Hello friends, my name's Emile and I just want to say Happy New Year to you all. Welcome to Reach the Peak, the show where you guys recommend the cars and then I take them up our hill climb course to see which one can come out on top. We have 5 cars here today as always, and we start off with another hypercar. We have the 2013 McLaren P1, 903 horsepower, 663 foot-pound of torque, 3,296 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful vehicle here today, the torquiest vehicle here today, the heaviest vehicle here today, and with snow tyres and a PI of S2978, this is the highest PI vehicle here today. So, without a doubt, it basically tops everything here today. So, the McLaren P1. This is the second hypercar we've ever had round. The first one was the Aston Martin Vulcan, which really didn't do particularly well because that car was not suited at all to the snow. The P1 I was thinking would have much of the same issues. I mean, it's rear-wheel drive for the kickoff, and it's got 903 horsepower to let loose through the back wheels. Couple that to the fact the P1 does rely on downforce a lot, and you have a recipe for disaster. How did the P1 actually do? It was surprisingly decent. In fact, it was very, very decent. The P1, I have no idea how this car tackled this hill climb course as well as it did. I thought with the Vulcan being so universally awful up here, the P1 really was going to struggle. But no, I mean, it could get its power down pretty darn well. It gets its power down better than cars with 300 horsepower. And this has 3 times that. It's pretty darn insane. I don't know if it's just because the P1 sort of doesn't need downforce as much as to the reason it handles as good as it does, because through the corners it's pretty darn phenomenal as well. Yeah, a solid car with one big catch. This thing is the worst thing I've ever had to deal with over the bumps. This is worse than the Vulcan over the bumps. I don't know what it is, but it just gets very, very upset. You can sort of see it there, it's sort of just bouncing around. On the landings of the jumps, it's very easy for this car to sort of go off in its own direction. You really need to hit the jumps basically dead center in the middle and preferably ease off the throttle a bit, otherwise the P1 will have a massive upset. Other than that though, the P1 is a surprisingly good rally car, as it turns out, if you want to go the rear-wheel drive route. Next up, we have a supercar from yesteryear. This is the 1992 Bugatti EB110, 611 horsepower, 480 foot-pound of torque with 3,126 pounds of weight. This is an S2 class car, 906 PI, when equipped with the snow tyres. The Bugatti EB110 is a 4-wheel drive supercar, which already means this is going to look good. Now, in terms of supercars that we've had around that are all-wheel drive, the only other one really was the Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera, and this thing in terms of sort of statistics does beat out the Superleggera by a little bit. The EB110, pretty darn great to drive up here, unsurprisingly. I do like the EB110. It's one of, I mean, I'm still not ultimately sure on it. It's a weird looking car, but it's one of the more interesting, somewhat forgotten of the 90s supercars, which obviously is a good thing. Personally, I'd probably take a Ferrari F50 over this, but yeah, the EB110 is still a pretty darn fantastic vehicle. And for up here, this is better than an F50. Haven't driven the F50 around here yet, but considering this thing's all-wheel drive and has more power and so on, I can already tell you that this is going to be better up here than the F50 is, although on tarmac the F50 does have the advantage. Yeah, pretty great car. Does understeer on the slower end corners. I did need to snag the handbrake a couple of times in the EB110 just to get it around the corners, just to sort of persuade it a little bit more. But other than that, the EB110 is a very, very solid vehicle to drive, and I wasn't really expecting much different out of this vehicle. Of course, it doesn't have the brute power that the McLaren that just went round has, but that 4-wheel drive should play into this car's advantage. It will be very interesting to see where this car places, because currently at the top of our leaderboard we have 2 Group B cars and the Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera. Be interesting to see if this car can knock off one or even both of the Group B cars, although whether this thing will beat the Metro or not I do find a little bit unlikely. Next up, we have a proper rally car now. We have the 1982 Lancia 037 Stradale, 202 horsepower, 172 foot-pound of torque, £2,549 with an asterisk next to it. The rally parts do add a couple of pounds here and there. I didn't keep track of the exact number. I think it's only like £6 though, so it's pretty negligible. A-class car, 751 in PI when equipped with the snow tyres. The 037 is known for being one of the better hot lapping cars in Forza. Ever since Forza Motorsport 4, I believe, this thing has been pretty darn dominant when it comes to setting lap times. And as we found out throughout doing Forza Top Gear laps, the 037 has always been a very consistently good vehicle. Often, you know, in Forza, I believe this car's a C-Class in Motorsport 6 and 4. This car can show up B-Class cars around the Top Gear track pretty darn easily. It is a hot lapping hero. When it comes to actual snow though, how does it do? It's alright. It does struggle. Unfortunately, you know, not having all-wheel drive does hurt this car, and the 5 Turbo the 5 Turbo dealt with the snow better, I feel. This car seems to get very bogged down here. That's at least what it feels like to me. You know, it's not really able to show its full potential because it just keeps getting dragged down by the snow here, which is a bit of a shame. The 5 Turbo didn't really have that. I'd assume with that, it's a combination of it weighing a bit less and having a bit less power to stick down to the ground, and also the smaller wheelbase meaning you can chuck it around a bit more. Yeah, out of the 037 and the 5 Turbo, I would probably go with the 5 Turbo, personally. Although, again, the 037, not a bad car, certainly by any stretch of the imagination, but if you're looking for a Group B rally car to sort of throw around on the snow, I'd probably suggest you more look towards, say, the Delta S4 if you're looking for a Lancia, because it's better at dealing with this because it's got 4-wheel drive. Alternatively, if you're open to different manufacturers, 205 T16 and the Quattro are both probably very good shouts, but yeah, the 037, not my favourite of the Group B cars, if I'm being honest. Still a very darn interesting car. A bit of a shame this one gets forgotten as much as it does. But yeah, a little bit disappointing up here, unfortunately. Next up, we have a car which I am very much scared of. This is the Dokervoort D8 GTO. It has 375 horsepower, 358 foot-pound of torque, and weighs 1,532 pounds. This is the second lightest vehicle here today by 2 pounds. And bear in mind, the lightest vehicle here today has, well, less than a third of the horsepower of this. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe of disaster. For those of you who don't know, a Dokervoort is basically a hopped-up Caterham. It's not really a Caterham, but think of it in terms of a Caterham being hopped up and you're about there. It swaps out the Ford Galaxy unit for, or at least in the higher model Caterhams, they have units out of Ford Galaxies. This has a inline 5 Audi turbocharged, yeah. It's an interesting car, 5-cylinder turbo. You'd expect me to love it. It's a little bit more substantial than a Caterham as well. It's got a bit more sort of bulk to it. How does it drive though? Very difficult. Very, very difficult. Probably one of the more difficult vehicles I've ever had to drive up here. I did actually spin this on numerous occasions. It's kind of uncontrollable, if I'm being honest. Of course, you wouldn't expect a car like this to do well up the rally course, and I dread the day where I have to eventually do the Caterham, because if this is this bad, bear in mind on Forza, usually this car is extremely understeery, but surprisingly decent. The Caterham, however, when I drove it on for Top Gear laps, in the rain especially, the Caterham was uncontrollable, and I'm very scared of doing the Caterham. But yeah, the Dokervoort, this isn't its territory. You know that though. Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing, but it's not surprising, so I guess in that sense it isn't really that disappointing. Ultimately, keep this thing on road. Just keep it on the road. You don't need to take it off-road. I'd be interested to see what you can do. If you can make a good off-roading one, I'd be curious. I guess you probably could if you use like enough downforce and maybe put some off-road suspension on this thing, but yeah, you're much better off at just looking at normal cars. Don't take the Dokervoort to the snow. It doesn't like it. Finally today we have a glorified golf cart. We have the 2015 Polaris RZR 1000, 110 horsepower, 70 foot-pound of torque, 1,530 pounds of weight. This is a C-Class car, 567 MPI when equipped with the snow tyres. I forgot to mention the GTO is an S1 class car, 849 MPI when equipped with the snow tyres. The RZR is the least powerful vehicle here today, the lowest on torque, the lightest weight, and the lowest PI vehicle here today. So, yeah, pretty much an opposite of what the P1 was. Unlike the P1 though, this is four-wheel drive, which could be a good thing. Now, the first thing to mention with the Polaris is you hear that engine sound? Get used to it, because this vehicle has a CVT gearbox. I believe this is one of the only cars in Forza to ever have a CVT, which basically means it just sits there and whines a hell of a lot. It just whines constantly, which does get a bit irritating. If you put the race gearbox in this thing, you can upgrade it up to a 6-speed manual, which to be fair is probably a better idea. But you know me, I like to drive the car stock, and considering this thing has a CVT, and I don't think any other car in this game does, I find that kind of interesting. Well, actually no, because I guess you could say the Regera and the Tesla are also one-gear cars, but they're not CVTs. Anyways, how does the Polaris do? It's decent handling, but it's very slow, as you'd probably expect. Again, glorified golf cart, essentially. Not the slowest thing I've driven up here, certainly there have been much slower cars up here, but it feels slow up here, and you'd kind of expect that, really, from the Polaris. In terms of upgrades, I'm not actually sure what you can do with this thing. I think you can stick about 200 horsepower in it before it starts sort of not wanting to put any more power through it, which is a bit of a shame. I would have loved to swap an Aventador V12 in here, but, well, that isn't possible, obviously. The Polaris is fine. I'm not a huge fan of the Polaris to begin with anyways. It's just not my thing, really. These sort of off-road buggies just really are not my thing, but it's fine. I wouldn't recommend driving it up here, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I'd recommend you sort of stick with pretty much every other car you've seen here today, but it's not terribly bad. Anyways, on to the times for today, and, well, the Bugatti EB110 goes in second place with a 204.091, knocking the RS200 off the second spot, which is pretty impressive. Group B cars do very well around here, and that does knock it off. The McLaren P1, however, really does surprise, going in seventh with a 211.098. That is the quickest rear-wheel drive car we've ever had around here. It beats the quickest sort of normal all-wheel drive car we've had going around here, the R34 Skyline. It beats that by over 2 seconds. The P1 was surprisingly decent. Yeah, shockingly good, in fact. Moving down the board, we find the rest of the vehicles for today. Dokervoort D8 GTO goes into 20th with a 222.576. Loses out on the Aston Martin Vulcan. Yeah, the Dokervoort just struggled with its handling. Lancia 037 Stradale, 21st, 222.709, does beat the 5 turbo by over 2 seconds, but the 5 turbo was way down on power and PI, so that's not really surprising. And finally today, the Polaris goes into 23rd with a 225.279. Surprisingly quick time from there, actually. Beats the Subaru Legacy by over 2 seconds, and the S14 by over 4 seconds. Was not expecting the Polaris to be quite that good. Anyways, friends, that is it for this episode. As always, if you have cars you'd like to see take on the hill climb course, simply leave them down below in the comment section and I will add them to my list. Thank you all very much for watching as always, friends. My name has been The Real Emile, and until next time, a farewell.